The Audible Live. We are here with you on the eve of training camp, at least in Denver, and I know in other cities as well. It is the Audible Live. Cecil Lammey, Matt Waldman, Dr. Jene Bramel with Sigmund Bloom on assignment. He's got jet lag as he was traveling to the Mile High City. And Matt, we're right here, brother. We are so close to actual football, kind of, with preseason kicking off this weekend.
Yeah, it's final. It's kind of finally here. We got the pace car circling around the track, and which is nice as compared to like listening to all the analysts talk about what the race might be like and not seeing anything going on. So, yeah, I'm definitely excited about it, and we'll actually get to see at least some little bit of we'll get the keyhole will be a little wider, this month to see what's actually going on.
What's going on with Dr. Jene Bramel? And I'm sure you've probably had a ton of questions about Andrew Luck already, Dr. Jene, because there's video and there's reports coming out where Andrew Luck is like bombs away and everything's fine. And fantasy owners going crazy. Like, I'm going to take him in the 4th round now. All right, let's pump the brakes. Let's talk about Andrew Luck. Everyone's anxious and a little nervous. Dr. Jene, where do you sit?
Yeah, we all go through a little bit of withdrawal when the season ends, and we go through a number of months where there's a ton of news, but not much really going on. And then, as soon as everybody reports to camp, there's video, and, we're micromanaging and watching the number of throws that Andrew Luck makes in the same way that we're watching, the draft prospects, the quarterbacks throw at the combine and otherwise, and counting how many missed passes Luck makes and otherwise. So I don't usually say this. I think it's important to watch the news pretty carefully, but you could pretty much ignore Twitter. You could ignore a lot of the beat writer reports those first 48 hours. No offense there, Cecil. When we're trying to look for things to go after there. But everything I saw from Luck today, like, the bottom line is this time last year, he wasn't on PUP. This time last year, he wasn't throwing the ball. It's the very opposite this year. He's not on PUP again, but he's throwing the ball, and everything's been very optimistic. And not only that, but Frank Reich said yesterday, as they reported, that he thought there was a chance. In fact, he kind of said that Luck would probably participate in the first preseason game. I think it's too soon to say that with any certainty, but that's a very positive sign. And then for him to be out there in 11-on-11 work today also suggests that while he's not been cleared for contact yet, they're willing to put him out there where he start to work on his timing and a few other things. So this is as good as it gets for Andrew Luck right now. They're still going to limit his reps early in camp. And I wouldn't expect to see him do too much. He's going to be rusty, but don't overreact to, he completed 2 out of his first 6 passes and underthrew an interception and this or that or the other. Andrew Luck throwing a ball in team drills is really a good sign right now. Does that mean he's going to be ready for week 1 and be productive and throw with velocity and accuracy and all those other things? We're not there yet, but him participating in camp after these last 19 months of difficulties is a very, very good sign.
All right. Well, if we're going to talk about Andrew Luck, then of course, you know it. You love it. He almost made the PUP list. Then he avoided the PUP list.
He was never going on the PUP list. Carson Wentz was never going on the PUP list. I with all due respect to the national media members and things like out there, we don't need to make more of that story than it was either. Every team with an injured player, and they probably went through this calculus with Andrew Luck as well, are under consideration during their physical examination. Is there any reason that we shouldn't put them on the active roster? And some players, that takes all of 2 seconds to decide, and other players, not so much. But given what Carson Wentz did at the end of OTAs in minicamp, unless there was some setback that we weren't aware of, and there clearly wasn't, there's not a lot of reason for him to be on the PUP list. And then not only that, but he was also doing 11-on-11 work today in camp. And it didn't seem like it was any more than just some handoffs or some pitches or things like that. Nobody was, he wasn't in the pocket where somebody might roll on him if they fell down or trip or something like that. But they put him out there. So, his next hurdle again is he's got to be cleared for contact. They have to be comfortable with what he's doing in the pocket. I think he's further away from playing week 1 than Luck is right now. And that's only because it looks like, unless something really goes wrong with Luck, he's going to play week 1. Wentz, with Nick Foles there and the type of injury that he had, Doug Peterson is saying he wants his injured players to be 100% before they play. And I think it's unlikely that Carson Wentz, regardless of what some of the what some of the reports on Twitter were today. I don't think there's much chance that Wentz can be productive outside the pocket, scrambling and running in the way he was before the injury. So he's not going to be 100%. I don't think that precludes him from playing. But I don't think there was much chance of him starting on the PUP list. I think it would have been more concerning for him to be on the PUP list than for us to say, that it's a great sign that he wasn't. I think this was expected.
We've got great questions coming in via the chat room, which is reacting to us on the Audible live. Sigmund's on assignment, but we were talking about Josh Gordon yesterday as I got to show him the new house, Dr. Gene, and have a couple cold pops, and just kind of talking about everything. And I agree with what Sig said. He was like, I don't think football's for Josh Gordon. And, staying away, going away, anxiety, getting treatment, whatever. Like, for me, I don't really care about the football part with Josh Gordon. Just everybody be happy and healthy. And clearly, if there's anxiety issues, and clearly, if we're to put our hats on, like, okay, self-medicating with weed all the time, man. If this was truly the case, people worried, when's he coming back? All that kind of stuff. For me, Gene, it's like, I don't care. I just want him to be healthy and move on with his life, whether that includes football or not. That's not a big deal, but fantasy owners don't like that answer. So, Dr. Gene, do we have anything to look at here? Is this something also, Carlos Henderson staying away here in Denver, is this also something maybe we could see a bit more of as mental health issues get a light shined on them that always, should have been there?
Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to get a different answer from me as far as what fantasy folks should do with their players. We're talking about, I think it's been 5 years since Josh Gordon has played it down. So I'm with you. I think we should be hoping he's healthy. We should be excited if he returns to camp, and then we should be really elated if he's productive and gets back to anything close he was before. We heard a lot of positive things in the offseason, but I often tell folks in the office that this isn't as simple as looking in an ear and saying you have an ear infection and giving you amoxicillin and you're better in a couple of days. This is an ongoing issue, and many folks can recover, but it's more of a remission than it is a full recovery. And if there was any concern that being in the training camp environment, being in the Hard Knocks environment, and you've seen all sorts of speculation, but if there was concern about that, his mental health takes precedence. And, hopefully this doesn't become a when's he back. It's more of let's get him healthy and we'll worry about football afterwards. And that'll be the case. And I think your point there, regarding is this to be a little bit more likely? I don't know if it's going to prove to be a little bit more likely or not. There's a ton of angles and nooks and crannies we can talk about this, but I do hope that as the folks that people tend to look up to, athletes in the spotlight, if it does bring a little bit more understanding and vision to mental health issues, I think that's if there is a little bit of some good that can come of what we're seeing some of these players go through, hopefully their experiences can help others understand what everyone's going through, and those that may need help, go ahead and get it.
Gene, who is on the NFI list or the PUP list that you think really needs to be highlighted here?
I don't know that there's anybody in particular. I think this summer was better than previous summers. We can go back to, is Rob Gronkowski going to come back through his back or his arm injuries? What was the status of Andrew Luck last year? And we've talked about other players about that in the past. There's been really not much other than optimism on the injury front. Offensive players, defensive players, and offensive linemen. There haven't been that many surprises, I don't think. And the players we were watching closely all seem to be doing maybe even a little bit better than expected. So, we're hearing Dalvin Cook's not even participating with the brace, and he looks good. All of these guys have been cleared for contact. Really the two players that I think we're watching most carefully, well, a few. Donta Foreman, I think we're going to have to watch a little bit carefully. It's going to be, it's not very clear whether or not he's going to be able to return by the end of camp. He's on the PUP list and may not come off. I'm hopeful that we'll see Alshon Jeffrey come off and be able to practice far enough in advance of the regular season where we're not too worried about him. But I think the name that everybody has kind of become the Jordan Reed and Arian Foster of this year is Tyler Eifert. And, hearing some people say that he tweaked his back, and then he was pretty defiant and adamant when he talked to reporters today that there wasn't anything going on and that this was just a precaution. This is 2 back surgeries. Both of them have taken a little bit longer to recover from. Somebody has heard that he's tweaked his back. He's not ready for practice at this point. He got no looks really on the free agent market at all and had to take a 1-year deal with Cincinnati. He needs to get on the field and produce, and I think he knows that. And if he's not healthy enough to pass a physical, whether it's just a conditioning situation at the end of July, another almost 8 full months after his most recent back surgery, it was probably a little bit longer than that, then there's reason for concern. So I think everything else has been positive, but Tyler Eifert sort of stands out like a sore thumb. Actually, that surgery was back in October, so we're looking at 10 months now where he's not ready to go. So there's something more going on there, and it's looking less and less likely that he's going to get back to the player that he was before his back started acting up a couple of years ago.
Super quick on the Eifert thing, and then I've got another question for you, Dr. Gene. Is there ever such a thing as like back when I had a bad back? It just seems like that. Not to go off track, but the Nuggets drafted Michael Porter Jr., who could have been the #1 pick last year. Already come out, blah, blah, blah. He's not going to play a year. He's like 19 or whatever. He's got back problems. He had surgery. Is there ever anything of like, oh, I remember when my back was, does that get better?
It can, but what originally, and we don't think of this because we're talking about, in Porter's case, I don't even know if he turned 20 yet, but these guys are all, 20s, early 30s athletes. We don't necessarily think about degenerative changes in the back, degenerative changes in the knee. And I think when we hear about cartilage things and otherwise, we understand that, they're taking a beating multiple times a day over a long period of time and lots of reps and lots of full speed action during games. And there's going to be issues there. And even with minimally invasive and the best surgical techniques we have now and seeing players recover, these are not easy things to recover from, even with the best surgeons and the best rehab staff. So when you're talking about multiple degenerative changes and when you have something, like the kinetic chain of the back there, one issue can lead to another, just like we say compensatory injuries happen with muscle strains and things like that. The same thing goes with the back. So, even though the type of procedures he has, you hope they have removed the offending part of the disc fragment and everything's allowed to heal and there's not much there, but there's still room for some degenerative changes. There could be some bone spurs there, or the fact that, that area is weak and it goes on. I think there are some players that can probably look back and say, I feel as good or better as I did before the injury, and I don't have anything else ongoing, but that's generally not the case. I don't have any particular studies to back it up, but I would be very shocked if we did a longitudinal study of guys who have had back issues and surgery, and we didn't see that overall they had a shorter career length than guys who haven't. We've also talked about on this show that, if you were to do an MRI of every person that came through the combine, and this was done in a couple of years, that at least 30 to 40% of them will already be showing some degenerative changes in the back, whether they have symptoms of that or not. So just is what it is with these back folks. And what we always talk about is if you have more than one back injury and you show that you're not recovering well, you just have to be concerned. And it's something we talked about with Gronkowski recently, and he seems to have recovered reasonably well. But Eifert isn't in that category right now.
Matt, thanks for letting me double up here. And by the way, our chat room, Justin, I know I can drink a beer with Justin because he puts in the chat room, doctor says I need a bacchiotomy. Half-baked referencers are always welcome. Deshaun Watson, welcome in fantasy lineups, Dr. Gene. We have to feel really good. And what's important to note in what you said about wins, and then what you said about luck, is like team drills versus individual drills. I will be tweeting those first 48 hours, and yeah, there's going to be some excitement. And no, we're not going to know anything about the running backs in Denver until week 3 of the preseason, because Pat's got to come on. You got to start live tackling. But when you say team drills, that's much more important than individual drills. It's a higher level. So you must like what you're hearing, Gene, about Deshaun Watson then.
Yeah, and I think at this point in camp, we're looking for what they're doing rather than how they're doing it. So the fact that these guys are cleared for almost everything short of contact is more important than how many passes they complete and how they look doing it. You would expect Andrew Luck to have a little bit of rust. You would expect Carson Wentz to maybe take a false step now and then. You would expect Deshaun Watson to maybe take a little bit of time to feel comfortable enough to get outside the pocket when he's finally cleared to do so and practice. So the fact that they're doing these things is important, more so than just how they're executing in this. Now, when we get to second, third week of the preseason, if we still hear accuracy issues with Luck, if we still hear that Wentz has not been cleared for contact and he doesn't look likely to get any preseason game time, or there's any concern at all with Deshaun Watson, then I think it's time to be concerned about how they're doing it. But for now, let's just pay attention to when they're on the field and when they're cleared to take the next step.
Gene, this is time for our annual, does it help a player to get larger or smaller? And let's talk about Christian McCaffrey getting bigger and the idea that he may be in store for larger workloads, so that he has gotten, he's added some muscle to his frame. So what do you really expect that to be about? Is that about absorbing punishment? Is that helpful? Is it about having more power and strength? Or is it about becoming more explosive? What are you looking at here?
Yeah, it's really hard to know prospectively whether these guys, the body changes they're making, are going to be something that's productive for them. So the first question I always ask is why? Why are we doing this? What was it about your previous body type and size, flexibility, explosiveness, whatever it may be, that wasn't good enough before? And for some of these young players, most of them now are in high-profile college programs with NFL caliber weight programs and training programs and nutrition programs and all those sorts of things. And they come into the league ready to go. This isn't baseball. It's not similar to basketball in that regard, with a few exceptions. Most of these players come into the league, the body types are pretty well maxed out already. So if there's something that they didn't like about their body type before, about the position that they're still playing, then you have to ask why. So why is Christian McCaffrey doing it? Is he doing it to be a little bit stronger? Does it a little bit extra weight help him to absorb pounding a little bit better? I don't know that that's would necessarily be proven to be the case. But if he had a little bit more room to go with his body frame, and we're talking about just 5 to 8 pounds, then it's probably not that big a deal. And we're not sacrificing agility and explosiveness for power, because that doesn't really seem to be McCaffrey's game. And if we're talking about him going from 8 to 10 touches to 12 to 15, then yeah, maybe that is a little bit helpful. But these guys tend not to, I wouldn't think, and I'm not there knowing exactly what their weight is day to day. I don't think that they maintain their training camp reporting weight all the way through the season for lots of different reasons. So maybe that's part of it. He's giving himself a little bit of head start. And then the other question I have is, how did they do it? Did we do this in a couple of months where, maybe we're putting a little bit more stress on the joints and the tendons and all those things? And, we've all seen the pictures of Laron Landry and a few others that I kind of like to poke fun at, where it looks like somebody, put a bicycle pump in their body someplace and blew them up. It needs to be done slowly, effectively, cautiously, and in the right way. And if that happens, and it's just the natural increase in body mass that you'd expect as folks mature, then I don't think there's any difficulty with it. We've definitely seen some players over the years where they're gaining a ton of weight and it's not necessarily in the right places and it ends up costing them.
And Ben Roethlisberger just has a fat face, even though he's looking leaner. Hell, I have a fat face. My high school coach called me the Mexican Charlie Brown as a compliment. Anyway, Dr. Jene Bramel, the Audible live here at footballguys.com, youtube.com/footballguys, DOTCOM. Looks like we can get you 2 more questions, Dr. Gene. One for me, one for Matt. And my question is about Dalvin Cook, saying he's not wearing a knee brace. That, to me, signifies a player that doesn't have that mental side to worry about. Usually when these players come back from knee injuries, there's always that, he maybe looks a little gingerly out there when he's making these moves. Maybe he keeps that big old brace on a little bit longer than he should. Dalvin Cook says he's not going to wear it for the year. That is positive to me, and fantasy owners are already positive and high on Dalvin Cook.
Yep, I agree. There have not been studies that suggest that wearing a brace is protective for knees. I know a lot of the offensive linemen do it. Maybe it's a little bit protective for the inside of the knee, the MCLs, but I don't think it's been shown to significantly prevent recurrence of ACLs on that knee or the other knee. And I think you've hit on the important point there. It shows the comfort level that he has, that he's not worried about that knee at this point. He likes the way he feels without the brace, and that's what he did before the injury. And if that's what he's feeling after the injury, and by all reports, his early camp has gone very well too, you have to like what we're hearing about Cook.
Let's go with Alshon Jeffrey and that shoulder being placed on the physically unable to perform list. Now, one of the things I want to ask you is not so much about the torn rotator cuff, though. I mean, that's important, and I want you to address that. But I'm also interested in the fact that before last year, he did this whole work with a body alignment specialist so that he could rework his upper body in a way so that it would make his hamstrings looser. That's kind of what the thought was, that he was like reconditioning his body through a variety of mobility and stretching exercises. So my question to you is, if he's still kind of not quite there with a rotator cuff surgery, how much ability did he really have to continue these types of exercises and work that allowed him to play, injury free to the lower body that always plagued him?
Yeah, I think there's likely a lot of work going on that we're not aware of within, one of the things that analytics is probably helping on the injury side is mobility and flexibility, core strength, functional mechanics, all of those sorts of things. And that's probably what Jeffrey's approach was there. Even though there was a period of time where they would have immobilized Jeffrey's shoulder, I would think from a core strength perspective and a flexibility perspective, a lot of the things that he was likely trying, he would have been able to do even relatively soon after the surgery. And I think the expectation all along was for Jeffrey to be on the PUP list. And we haven't gotten a lot of specifics from Doug Peterson, but what we have heard in the media over the past few months is this was sort of planned for. He had the surgery early. Can't guarantee that he's going to be ready in 6 or 7 months in time for week 1, but that's been the expectation all along. And that as we went from May into June, even though he wasn't allowed to do anything in minicamp, the process that he'd seen going through rehab was more reassuring. So he was being allowed to do much more. And again, I don't know when that's going to be. There really hasn't been, I wouldn't say he's day to day, but I think somewhere in the week to week category is where we should consider Jeffrey. And even if he doesn't participate in a preseason game, until we hear something concerning, I think we can take all the positive reports at face value through the offseason and expect that he's going to be ready to be productive in week 1. And some of that may be due to Wentz too, whether or not he's ready to do what he needs to do. Nick Foles aside, I think we probably would expect Jeffrey to be a little bit more effective overall if Wentz was the quarterback rather than Foles.
He's Dr. Jene Bramel. You follow him on Twitter at Jene Bramel. Check out his work at footballguys.com. And Gene, could you guess? Don't spoil it, Matt. Could you guess what book I've been reading?
Don't spoil it.
Don't spoil it.
Matt knows.
Matt knows because I told him.
I have no idea.
Okay, I will show you.
Something about Air Jordans. Oh, no.
No. Japanese throwing weapons. Next time I do the Audible, I want to be wearing, look at that. It's a forearm guard of shurikens.
He wants to be Aaron Donald's trainer.
I don't think I'm going to allow you to practice on me in Mobile.
Get out there like Aaron Donald does. Dr. Gene, be good, baby. We'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Enjoy the week, guys. See you.
It is the Audible Live. Matt Waldman, Cecil Lammey with Sigmund Bloom on assignment. And the chat room is reacting. You mentioned it, Matt, though, and the Christian McCaffrey workload. 200 carries. Can he do it? Can he produce with it? Is he effective enough? He's never going to be a pile pusher. We know that. It's not going to be 3rd and 1. You're going to plug it up the middle with Christian McCaffrey. It's Norv Turner. Norv Turner has a tailback-friendly offense, but maybe not a halfback-friendly offense. And there is a difference because there's a difference between a running back, a tailback, and a halfback. McCaffrey is a halfback. Anderson's a tailback. And, well, running back is for a different story in this conversation. But they want McCaffrey to do it. Can he? What about the fit with Norv Turner? Hopefully Norv Turner doesn't quit. There's some big-time questions on a player that fantasy owners are taking in, the mid-second round? As like running back 12 in PPR leagues?
I was excited to hear it, to be honest with you, because I'm kind of in that camp where I believe that this whole, he can't hold up kind of thing is just kind of bull hockey. You know, to me, it's more about, are you trying to preserve him for a 7-year career? Or are you trying to use him to the best of his ability for a 3 to 5 year career? And I think when it comes down to it, you look at what he did in that Stanford rugby offense that they had, where it's basically a scrum, and he was so good at being able to pick his spots between the tackles. And we saw that he's plenty quick enough, even for the NFL, to be able to do that. And he's a patient runner. He sees between the tackles extremely well, and he's a very solid decision maker. So CJ Anderson, obviously, from the standpoint of the power to push a pile, as you referred to, he's going to have an advantage there. But from a McCaffrey has the advantage in terms of, I think that his vision is every bit as good as CJ Anderson's. I think that his movement and footwork is better, and CJ Anderson is very good. He's underrated in that category. So you're looking at a player who, if they can use him the right way and give him a chance to also work in space, why can't he be a Brian Westbrook-like or Giovanni Bernard-like player? And those guys, if given the opportunity, have shown that they can carry a load depending on the way the offense is used. And I think too often we fall back on these kind of lazy assumptions that bigger player means that, you know, he's a load carrier and he's going to be able to do that, and that a smaller player automatically can't. And I think that if they're willing to do that with him, that tells you that they do believe that he has that kind of Reggie Bush type of ability to be an every down back, but not in the way that we think of that. I mean, I think we think of every down backs and think Adrian Peterson, you know, Earl Campbell, you know, Le'Veon Bell's kind of the exception because he's big enough, but yeah, he can do those McCaffrey-like things, but they're still big guys. Todd Gurley, you know, but McCaffrey can fit within that as long as what they're looking for here is that the distribution of the touches that he gets aren't so much about wearing down a defense, you know. I mean, because a running back is part of wearing down a defense in a power running game, and this isn't exactly that. You're going to see him kind of really work under players and get under them and avoid some of that contact, or just push behind his lineman a little bit and get what's there. But they're more about trying to break big plays with him in a way where, you know, you're using the speed and quickness. So to me, what's most interesting about this is how that distribution is going to come about. But if they're thinking ideally they want 25 to 30, that means if they get 18 to 20, we're looking at in a running back one, because that's generally what it takes.
I would be excited if Norv Turner seemed to be a bit more creative. And I love his offense again for tailbacks.
Yeah.
Do you have confidence he'll kind of update some things, you know, and not try to rely on a 90s offense, which can still be productive? Again, Norv Turner's had great success with backs that he's worked with. Is the creativity there?
I think the question really is I think the answer is no, it probably isn't. So that's going to be the downside there. But then the question is creativity needed if the line plays well? Is creativity needed if the players execute to how they're supposed to? The question, but as we know, is Carolina's line really all that great? Not really. So that's a big question mark. But what I also thought was they tried to be creative last year, and one of the biggest things that they did wrong was they got too creative with Christian McCaffrey, going, let's not run him downhill. Let's do everything but run him downhill. And then when they did, you're like, that's what you're supposed to have done. Like this, he looked his best as a runner when they said, get downhill and let's do some between the tackles running. Let's stop doing this jet sweep or misdirection stuff, or work outside a little bit and then you get the ball and then head downhill. And it's like, look, you're basically running like the AMC Gremlin offense, which is basically part station wagon, part compact car, total piece of crap, you know. And I can say that for sure because I lived on the side of the road in one with my mom when we grew up when she bought that car. But you know, that's the kind of offense they're running with this running back. And it's like, look, just because he's small doesn't mean anything in terms of just because he's short. Let him be a downhill runner because that's what he does great. And I think they're going to get a chance to do that. So I'm excited about it a little bit more, because if that offense wasn't so great before, doing it the wrong way, but they showed flashes the right way, then I'm more optimistic about it, even though I'm not sky high, you know.
It's the way that you run too. I mean, McCaffrey has always been adept at running and manipulating small spaces inside. And he's not a guy that gets himself in trouble by running up in between and running to the back of his offensive lineman. As you mentioned, the scrum offense of Stanford, where he'd pick and choose and he'd stop his feet, things that you wouldn't normally teach running backs to do. McCaffrey could do that. And as you like to say, Matt, he wasn't one of these smaller backs that would take everything to the corner store. So that's something we can all appreciate when watching these players. We had always discussed Kamara and the way that he ran inside. Like, he'd kind of just lower his head and go, but he was never afraid to go inside. He seemed to have better vision when he got outside the tackle. So it's an interesting discussion, and one that we'll see unfold here in the 2018 season. Now, the chat room is fired up, and they're firing off some questions. Matt, one is they want to know what you're drinking. So let's get that one. What's on the menu tonight?
It's boring unless you just want me to tell you. I mean, I can make something up, but it's really just called H2O. So that's about it.
H2O from a glacier. This one from Andrew says, Redskins are having an open competition between Geis, Perrine, and Kelly. Any chance that Geis doesn't win? And any chance this turns into a multiple back committee similar to Philly? Yeah, committee should mean 3. I know running back by committee can mean 2. Chris Thompson's already there. Chris Thompson has that established role. Chris Thompson's going to be fine. And in PPR leagues, Chris Thompson has plenty of flex value, some RB2 upside even. We're all assuming Geis wins the job, and it's very dangerous. In our preseason watch list that have kicked off this week, Bloom and I talked about Deshaun Watson for must have been 10 minutes out of the conversation of 25-minute show, because it's like, okay, everyone's saying Watson at QB2, and the blinders are on. Well, let's take them off and let's really look at this situation. Everyone's saying Geis is going to win the job. We know about the talent. We know that he admitted to be lazy and playing Fortnite all the time. Like, okay, there's plenty of off-field things, and that's why he fell in the draft. But when you look at the talent, we know it's there. We've got those, like, hey, he's the starter. Is that going to happen in your eyes?
It's interesting because I look at it and I think, okay, well, if these 3 guys were guitar players auditioning for a gig in a band, and Darius Geis would be Eddie Van Halen, Kelly would be Doug Farrar, who, no offense, Doug, I know you play guitar and I'm sure you're probably pretty good at it. And then who, Matt Jones, who was the other guy you mentioned in that Perrine?
Well, Perrine, and there you go. And Kelly, Rob Kelly.
Yeah, Rob Kelly and Perrine. So listen, I liked Perrine last year. And he wasn't quite quick enough, and they obviously drafted somebody else very highly. So what that tells me is that, maybe he's the session guitarist that they just weren't quite happy with. So you tell me who you think is going to win that opportunity for a heavy metal band or just a rock band in general is probably going to be Eddie. So you look at it from that standpoint, he's going to have to really screw this up to not get the gig. And that means that really what we're looking at here is either he is exactly what a lot of NFL teams thought, which is he's not worth the trouble, and everyone was going nuts about the fact that he dropped as far as he did, and we're going to find that out. Or I think more likely the opposite is true, which is he's young. Yeah, he likes playing some video games. He admits that he's a little bit this way. It's time to grow up a little bit, but he's mega talented, and it's not mega talented in an unrefined way like Paxton Lynch. It's mega talented in a very refined way. And I would say basically, if you're not drafting this guy within, your top 30, top 40 players, you're making a mistake.
The Audible live here Thursday nights, youtube.com/footballguys, DOTCOM. Stop on by, hit the little subscribe bell, and subscribe, and then the bell for notifications, all the hoops that you jump through with YouTube. But whatever, we appreciate everyone for watching the show. And of course, listening to the show on the Audible. Now, there is a question mark about what's going to happen with the Miami offense. And well, Kenyon Drake opening up camp with the starters, and we go through a speed back, maybe not the biggest back, Matt. So it kind of ties into the McCaffrey conversation. Adam Gase has got to win. Like, he is clearly on the hot seat. I know everyone, if you're talking about a Florida coach, is going to talk about Dirk Cutter and what's happening with the Buccaneers, but there is no doubt that they need better discipline. And it's something where their practices haven't been disciplined, their play haven't been disciplined. Ryan Tannehill is back. Okay. But Kenyon Drake, how much do you trust him this year for your fantasy squad?
Not enough that he's not a guy that I'm picking in drafts, and I understand the appeal for him, and he did get better because you could see a little bit more nuance out of his game last year at times, especially in the gap scheme, which is what he really does best, because really the gap scheme is, if you ask me, is the easiest for the running back to run, because you only have really one choice to make, and it's just about manipulating the crease in that, what that choice is, and it's about being, if you have the physical traits to match that scheme, and he does. He's fast. He's got good balance in terms of, natural contact balance. He's very good with that, and he can catch the ball extremely well. So he's a big play guy. But if you notice and watch his games, he had a lot of, the big plays he got were through big creases, through, on gap plays, and he made the most of them, and that's awesome. But when you watch him on plays where maybe the crease needed a little more manipulation to be able to get there, he ran into the ass of his defense, of his home blocker, and knocked himself out almost. I mean, there's a play I show where he literally rams his head into the ass of a player, and you can see his leg literally do that kind of like cross over his front leg, because he was so stunned from what happened there. And that's an extreme example, but it's one of those things where you saw multiple plays like that, where he'd either run into his own man. When he tries to cut, one of the guys that he should watch, because he's so explosive, and while not on this level, is Chris Johnson. Because I've been studying a lot of Chris Johnson tape, just kind of off and on, because I've just noticed that one of the things that he did so fantastically is that when penetration came into the line of scrimmage, into the backfield, he was so good at out of the backfield being able to take the ball, and as he was reading that while making the exchange, he would just turn his foot to the direction where he wanted to go, and his hips would turn with him, and without having to make this long jump cut and jump cut 1.5 yards towards that penetration, he could just simply anticipate it and turn his foot, and his hips turned with him, and completely avoid it without having to make that big move. And a lot of running backs make the mistake of where, when they see the obstacle coming in front of them, but they can't process it with their feet. And Drake is a perfect example of a great raw athlete who can catch and who can knock, bounce off defenders. And we know, as fantasy owners, we are seduced all the time by great athletes. Oh, they'll get coached up. Oh, they'll get better. Oh, right. This is, look at what he did. I mean, how do you deny that? That's the type of thing. I go to a friend's house and they'll look at me and go, what do you mean he's not good? How do you deny what he just did right there? And I go, because if he had done this like 3 steps earlier, he wouldn't have never had to even do that. But that's the kind of thing that he needs to learn. Frank Gore will school him if he's willing to learn. And I think the hope here is that he's learned enough, maybe with Frank Gore, and he said he's been trying to soak up as much knowledge as possible. But do we know what that means? Well, we're going to see on the field whether he was just giving that, the good old, I'm telling the media what they want to hear kind of thing, or whether he's actually, working in some way with Gore on a level that he could learn. Because let me tell you, as much as people downgrade Frank Gore, especially in the fantasy community, he'll whoop that tail if they give him a chance to right now, just in terms of his understanding of how to get the job done and do it. He won't break off those 80-yard runs, and he won't get you those highlight plays. But, Kenyon Drake will get you a lot more 2nd and 12s and 3rd and 7s when it was, I don't know, second and 3, and suddenly they're in 3rd and 7 because of what he did. Whereas Frank Gore is going to get you first downs. And maybe that offense might need that. And Frank Gore too, if this team is undisciplined, if Frank Gore is a rookie, literally was yelling at the veterans of his team and the 49ers when he was a rookie, and literally bawling and yelling at them and cursing them out in the locker room, and essentially for them not caring about playing. I'm pretty sure in his hometown, as a veteran all this time, I'm pretty sure that he will be a locker room leader. So it'll be interesting to see what he thinks of being a Miami Dolphin by midseason.
On Pritchard and Cecil, we call that GATA, GATA, get after that ass. So Frank Gore, if he needs to, he's going to go GATA on his own players.
That happens at Georgia all the time.
And here we go. The Audible Live with Cecil Lammey and Matt Waldman, taking your questions in the chat room, reacting to you, and also reacting to the overreaction. Matt, ride with me here. Is anytime there's some sort of holdout situation, the Le'Veon Bell situation, it was Julio Jones till he got his money moved around. Fantasy owners, there's those disaster, sky is falling type of takes. With Bell, it's pretty easy in terms of, okay, if someone's dumb enough to pass on him, I'm going to pounce on him, because we saw this last year where he'll hold out, he'll miss, and he'll come back in 9 days before the start of the season, and he'll be a running back one for your fantasy team. Do you feel the same way about players? And whether it was LaDainian Tomlinson years ago as a rookie holding out when that used to be a thing, and then, taking the fantasy world by storm as a rookie. Like, it's fine. It's fine. As long as the guy's staying in shape, as Julio Jones was. Now he's got his money moved around. And as Le'Veon Bell, I'm sure, certainly is as well, Matt.
Yeah, I'm more worried about Julio Jones scoring touchdowns in the red zone than I am about him being healthy. And I'm actually not.
Is that because of Ridley? I mean, we know Sarkisian is saying year two. We've talked about this in the preseason watch list, but I want to pick your brain because fantasy owners just seem nervous about Julio. I mean, it's Ridley. Some people talk about Austin Hooper. Nah, I'm watching Eric Salbert in Dynasty, Super Deep Dynasty. I love Salbert. But for me, it's like, okay, there's some hesitation there with Julio Jones. Why?
Because basically Sarkisian doesn't use him right, and now he's making an excuse that now he's getting more comfortable in year two when he was handed the keys to an excellent offense, and their communication was just awful as a team. So, I mean, it was just one of those situations where really it's on Sarkisian. I think he's on the hot seat this year, and he's got to make better. Now, what I do like about the addition of Ridley is that it's kind of more of a Roddy White situation. When Roddy White was healthy before the whole ankle injuries and the quick decline in his career, when him and Julio were both operating at peak efficiency, Roddy White was that guy that ran the tough routes. He ran the comeback at the sideline. He ran the deep out. He was the one that drew the Revises and drew the big name cornerbacks on third down. He was the one that he and Matt Ryan were automatic on these routes on 3rd and 12 or 3rd and 17 even, and they couldn't even stop him when they bracketed Roddy White. So what does that do? Well, it allows Julio to do what he does best. It makes life easier because teams couldn't cheat towards Julio on that level. And now you have Julio doing what he does best, which is run those deeper routes where he can tell a story on the deeper routes where he's really good at that. But Mohamed Sanu, nah, he's okay. He's not a factor on that level. And they misused Taylor Gabriel. Sarkisian misused him, didn't want to use him at all, it looks like. He talked about wanting to make them more complete receivers in certain ways and really didn't do much with them at all. So when you look at this, what I'm hoping is that Calvin Ridley comes in a complete enough receiver that whatever Sarkisian wants to do, it doesn't matter, because he can run the routes and do what he's supposed to do. And he can be more that precision Roddy White player because Matt Ryan is best at throwing those passes. He is not a great deep ball passer, and he doesn't have quite the arm for that. He's good enough in certain situations like play action, but anything over 45 yards is iffy. And so when you look at it from that perspective, if Calvin Ridley can be that guy like Roddy White was, now you can play two receivers. You don't need 3 or 4, and it doesn't become as predictable where you can do more run pass stuff with interesting situations with 2 tight ends or with 3 receivers and not have to go, well, Julio, or let's put everybody else in the game with Julio. So, and even then we know that Julio is still that guy. Back to Le'Veon Bell. I'm not worried about Bell at all because you made the point is that we've seen him do it before. If it's a first-time guy holding out, I'm more worried because I don't know what this guy's work ethic's about. I don't know what his deal is. But Le'Veon Bell came into the league, I don't know, 230, 240, whatever he was, and then decided on his own that he was going to slim down. And he was still a perfectly good Le'Veon Bell before that. So the fact that he came in there and then became even better because of that, this is a self-motivated guy. This is someone who definitely pushes himself. And yeah, he's had some issues here and there, and we're gonna sit there and talk about the pot, and we're gonna talk about some of those types of things. But all I know is that if I was interviewing a guy and basically I seen that he's doing all the proactive work all the time and he got into trouble for something immature in terms of what society said wasn't allowed to do, I'd kind of look more at the actions of all the work and the fact that he's been able to handle this before. And yeah, I'll be taking him if he falls to me.
Yeah, don't dummy up there. And what I conservatively estimate that 70% of the league smokes weed.
Right.
Like, you could say a drug test is an intelligence test because you know when it's coming, and you better help out there. But it is about the work, and again, we want everyone to be clean, happy, and whatever, and get down how you get down. But I always listen to Joe Rogan. I actually watch Joe Rogan's podcast on YouTube when I write during the day. And, guy talks about doing everything under the sun, but he's got 8 jobs. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't affect him in that way. Now, it does people differently. And I think that inebriants, alcohol, there's happy drunks, there's sad drunks, there's violent drunks. Weed's the same way. There's the wake and bake people that are like super lazy. And then there's the people that smoke weed all the damn time and go out there and are productive members of society and, and high level positions, not just, lower level positions, whatever. So a larger conversation we will get to one of these times a little bit deeper on the Audible Live. Colin Cowherd had his dumpster fire rate. Number 10 was the Denver Broncos. Trust me, we talked a lot about that today on Pritchard and Cecil.
The dumpster fire.
But number 1 was the Raiders. And he was like, Chucky's been away forever and all this. And I'm not going to get into that, where not the Raiders are a dumpster fire. But it does have that fantasy angle. And when he talked about, I don't know if the GM and the coach get along and all this, well, we know that John Gruden has his own personal scouting assistant, Dave Rosano, whose office is right next to him, that he brought on board when he came on board. And yeah, that's probably got to be a little bit odd for Reggie McKenzie. But one of the reasons I bring this up is to open the idea that Doug Martin might do more than people think, making a positive impression. Greg Olson has talked about that. It seems like once every 3 years. What are we going to have? We're going to have a lunar eclipse or what? Mars in the sky, a little bit larger tomorrow night or something. Anyway, okay, once every 36,000 years, this happens in the heavens. Well, once every 3 years, Doug Martin has 1,000 yards, and it's usually quite significant. So how are you playing this Oakland backfield? There's a lot of us that get our, I got my favorite late round pick. You've got your favorite late round pick, right? And whether, you look at Pettis in San Francisco as a favorite late round pick, Kiki Cutie is a favorite late round pick, Jordan Matthews for me is a favorite late round pick. Was Doug Martin one of those guys for you, Matt?
Yeah, I'm taking both Oakland backs, and I don't really care what anybody thinks about that because, when you look at where they're available, they're both undervalued, and the reason is because Jack Del Rio was afraid to use Marshawn Lynch last year. It was just kind of like saying, he was like that parent who was like who was going to threaten punishment on a misbehaving child, and he just keeps going, I'm going to count to 3. That didn't work. So I'm going to point my finger, and if you don't do this, hey, watch out. And next thing you know, it's just like defenses are like, whatever, because defenses basically played them like an unruly child in the middle of a shopping center. It was just kind of, it was sad because you look at what Marshawn Lynch did down the stretch. He was a running back 1. If you look at what he did early on when they used him in limited time just on film, he was the same old Marshawn Lynch. If you look at the fact that this offensive line is actually pretty darn good as a run blocking unit and still is going to be very good as a run blocking unit, most likely, that's another strength right there. And this defensive line may get better too. And I think that there's some potential for this defensive line to get better. Now the secondary's still a mess, so we'll see. If Garrett Conley can come in and actually show up that he is, a decent man-to-man corner and can and provide some help there as a second-year player starting in his first full season, that could be helpful to this defense and create game scripts that will be favorable to the run game. But when I look at this as a whole, Doug Martin at in the 12th round. Yeah, I'm taking Doug Martin in the 12th round. I mean, someone else can have Chris Carson. This line may get better and it may work out and he outproduce him. Someone else can have James White. Everyone loves James White. He's like the hippest stale thing in fantasy football that I've ever seen, because it's like his game's stale. It's not because he's bad. He's a smart, good player, but the love for him is stale. It's not going to happen. You're basically saying, you know what? I'm drafting late. I want good players who also have upside. So unless you're just going all safe in the late rounds where you're basically saying, you know what? I feel really good about picking a guy who's at best going to be maybe an RB3, because I think he only came close to doing it once, in his career thus far. Then yeah, good for you. You got production, but you didn't get meaningful production. So to me, Matt Breida, yeah, he's okay. He runs where he's supposed to go. Bilal Powell's got competition. LeGarrette Blount might be okay. But Doug Martin, right where he is, I mean, he is a running back one talent, but what you're hearing is this stupid ass narrative that he's slowed down. I don't know who is actually talking about it this way, but if you watch him against New England, he looks like a Pro Bowl back. It's injuries that sometimes slowed him down. And one of his biggest flaws is that he can be behind a craptastic line like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have been. And when they get penetration in the backfield, he tries to do too much because he's used to being really good. And so what happens with really good running backs when they used to be, having that kind of productivity and suddenly encounter these types of obstacles, they try to carry too much on their back. They try to do too much as the leader, an offensive leader. And he was looked at as kind of that offensive leader. And when he came back in and they were doing well, he looked fantastic. But then he had times where he tried too hard. And I think he wore out his welcome in Tampa Bay, and listen, John Gruden, people can talk about him being behind the times, but he wasn't sitting in an ESPN studio watching football film part-time while eating donuts and yakking up people and doing the showbiz dance and twirl the hat kind of things that big networks sometimes ask you to do and take up a lot of your time. He was watching a lot of film and doing a lot of preparation, and he wasn't one of those guys that I think was just shaking hands and kissing babies up there. So you have to understand that, yeah, we can joke around about scheme and how old, his schemes are. But all I know is that he's amassing some really good skill talent. He's got a good offensive line. He's got a decent enough quarterback. And he's not Joe Flacco. He's better than Joe Flacco. And Joe Flacco has been able to captain some decent things from time to time when he's had good skill talent around him. So when I look at this, when people say that, I'm thinking, they're facing a lot of nickel defenses. That if that John Gruden understands nickel defenses, this isn't anything new. This isn't anything that's like, oh my goodness, what are they going to do against that nickel defense?
Because I dare you to go with a light box against John Gruden.
Yeah, exactly. I dare you to go do that because Seattle didn't know what to do when they had on the brink of 2 Super Bowl championships with Marshawn Lynch and running the football. San Francisco with Jim Harbaugh during the height of all this era certainly wasn't, throwing the football around with Colin Kaepernick. He was running the ball with Frank Gore and those big old linemen and playing a power running game. But somehow we forgot that only happened like 4 to 5 years ago. And those rule changes happened before that. And that just because the New England Patriots throw the ball around and have James White, the stale fantasy favorite, or that we're going to have Corey Clement now being the next James White. Maybe he'll be better in that regard. And I think that he might be, but that's another subject. is just the fact that we're so wanting to be trendy about what good football is that you're looking at good football and going Oakland Raiders, oh well, they're stupid, they're funny. You know what you are? You're that nerd in high school who got picked on by the popular kids for stupid stuff. And now that you are the popular kid in this space, you feel like you want to be that guy. So you're going to find your nerd to pick on. And I think for them this summer, the Oakland Raiders are their nerd to pick on. And they may fail and because of their defense, but it's not because of their offensive talent. And I'm definitely picking Oakland Raiders, and that's more than Doug Martin and Marshawn Lynch. So that's my rant about Oakland.
I'm bringing up the Raiders on every show. My God, Matt Waldman fired up. Tonight, the Audible Live. That is a wrap for this evening's show. Training camp starts Saturday. So I'll be out there at Broncos training camp. Of course, we'll be back here on Thursday night. We got a lot to get to. Check out footballguys.com and subscribe to footballguys.com. Your greatest fantasy information, your projections, your rankings, your draft guides, your draft dominator. Check that out. If you want to dip your toe into the Football Guys product, then you can check out our Draft Dominator app there in your App Store or Google Play Store. Also, we've got plenty of free content for you at Football Guys in terms of the newswire that writes almost every day. So make sure to check that out as well. And we certainly appreciate you for being a football guy. He is Matt Waldman. You follow him on Twitter at Matt Waldman. I am Cecil Lammey.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, sure, man.
Okay, I just want to say one more thing about this because you just talked about Football Guys, and I have to say this: if you are not subscribing to Football Guys and you listen to us, I'm just telling you, look at the Draft Dominator, because the guys who fuel the projections there are the best in the industry. I know that, if you look at, Bob Henry, I just had him on a podcast. The guy has been this good and has been one of the top in the industry for over 20 years. 20 years. Some of you didn't even know what fantasy football was 5 years ago, and we love you that you're joining here to do that. But I want you to think about that. This isn't just, I've been doing this 20 years, so I deserve a raise. I'm talking about I've been doing this really well for 20 years. And he and Jason Wood and Mauro Tremblay and David Dodds are like super organs in the skeleton that Simon Shepard has made of a draft app. And they fuel so much of the great work that we do on top of the writers, on top of what Cecil puts out. He and Sigmund put out on a podcast that is just fantastic. So if you're not subscribing, you are so missing out. I don't even know where to begin. So I don't usually say that very often, but it really needs to be said today. So please check it out.
Yeah, there we have it. It is footballguys.com. For the great Matt Waldman, the fantastic Dr. Jene Bramel, I'm Cecil Lammey saying stay tuned and stay frosty.